Welcome to Dear Diaspora, a podcast celebrating the African diaspora and the changemakers, innovators, and entrepreneurs working to make our world a better one to live in. I'm your host, Ndulwa Kowa. Let's get started. Before I introduce the next two guests, I would like to take a moment to just say thank you. Thank you for leaving a review. Thank you for rating the show. Thank you for sharing it with your friends and your family. I super appreciate it. I've gotten so much love and support over these past few weeks, and it's something that I do not take for granted. So if you are listening and you're engaging and you are following us on social media, all of those things, I thank you so much. And if you like what you hear, again, don't forget to leave a review and make sure you're subscribed, and then also rate the show and share it with a friend. I am super excited to continue to put out episodes and have really great conversations with people across the diaspora. For this episode of Dear Diaspora, I was joined by the lovely Bulongo Sitali and her husband Muyatwa Sitali. So they are an amazing Zambian couple, and they also happen to be my aunt and uncle. I admire them so much. They both have experience advocating for health just around the world, and specifically Muyatwa Sitali works currently for UNICEF, and he is a WASH specialist, and he has over 10 years of experience in development aid and public policy. He's worked to advocate for health in Ghana and education in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, has lived in Senegal, has worked in Liberia. And so I just really admire all the experience that he's had. And his wife, Bulongo Sitali, is currently an MPH student at Rutgers University. She has experience with children's and health advocacy, and she wishes to join the global fight against disease. Our conversation was just so on point. It was specifically about Zambia because obviously I'm from Zambia and they're from Zambia. So we talked about their upbringing in Zambia, their experiences going to the Copperbelt University and Mulungushi University. We touched on agriculture and how the Zambian government specifically should be doing a better job supporting the agricultural industry. And then we talked more about their experience, first meeting, how they met and, their love story, which was super sweet. And then towards the end, they shared their experiences living and working in Liberia, and just, what they observed and, some of the lessons that they learned from there. It was a really beautiful conversation, and I left super inspired, and I might be a little biased because they're my aunt and uncle, but I can't wait for y'all to listen. And after you listen to the episode, I'd love to hear what you think. I will make sure to include some of the resources and things that were mentioned during the episode in the show notes. So yes, visit deardiasporashow.com. That's where I put all the show notes after the episodes are recorded and things like that. So yes, can't wait for y'all to listen. Here is my conversation with Muyatwa and Bulongo Sitali. Thank you so much for being guests on Dear Diaspora. I am so excited to have you on the show and just chat with you about the work that you do and just all your experiences, traveling and, working in different countries and things like that. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having us. We were excited to talk about everything.
Yeah, thank you, Ndulwa. We, as Bulongo says, we're really excited to have the chance to speak to you and to speak to your audience.
Awesome. So I think I wanted to start with, since both of you, spent the majority of your formative years in Zambia, I wanted to just ask how was it for you both growing up back home?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Well, for me, I could say that growing up, all I could remember is after my fifth year, my dad moved to Lesotho, and that's where I grew up from. Like, I did most of my primary school there, and when I came back to Zambia, I remember just having a very happy childhood. I could relate with everybody, and it was learning the language again because I did not have that chance when I was in Lesotho with my brother, sister, and dad. So I think growing up in Zambia, it was a happy childhood for me, but I don't know if Sitali can say the same. I'm not sure.
I think so. Well, I think that we had very different childhoods. So I grew up on a farm in a rural area, and I always joke with Bulongo that she's like the town mouse, and I'm like the kid that grew up in the rural area, tilling the land, growing vegetables, and sort of. Dealing with all sort of farm work. School for us was like 4 kilometers away, and that was a journey we walked on foot back and forth. But I think the part I share with Wolongo is the happy side. Even with all the hardships of farming, having to walk to school, it was always joyous. We walked to school with groups of kids, always funny, and then school was also interesting. And then I went to a boarding school. Bulongo went to a school not very close to home, but at least she used to go and come back home every day. Um, and then I went to university up on the Copper Belt, almost the same direction as Bolongo, but she didn't want to go that far, so she sort of went to a university close by. Yeah, but I think in terms of the happiness, that part is common to both of us. But then
Yeah.
she's the town kid.
So I think I could say like it was a happy childhood for both of us, even with the struggles that we went through growing up. Like I can say I lost my dad when I was 9 years old, and my mom had to take up that role, as both mom and dad, as a provider and also as a nurturer. So I think that even without having a father figure, I had like older brothers who were there to kind of guide and be the father figure in my life. So even with struggles, it was still a happy childhood, I can say. Yeah.
So, interestingly, well, maybe not interestingly. So, Oblongo says she lost her dad when she was 9. I lost my mom when I was 13, and she was the bread. My dad was a farmer. My mother was a teacher, and so in terms of a steady flow of income that came from mom's side because she's the one who had a steady salary, whereas for dad's side, that money came at the end of every season, which is at the end of every growing season, which is once in a year. And if you had a good harvest, then yes, you had a bit of money. If you didn't have a good harvest, then things just didn't work out that way. Yeah, so we had never actually talked about some of the similarities around how losing her dad changed the dynamic in terms of the main breadwinner in the family. And my losing my mom sort of changed that dynamic as well. And for most of my high school, even university, I mean, all the way up to the time I became independent, most of those costs were taken up by my elder brother, who sort of had to step in. Yeah.
Dang, that's so interesting to hear that you both kind of, had different upbringings, but then you had that thing in common, like the loss of like one parent and, like older siblings having to step up.
Exactly.
Right.
Wow. Dang. And so,
I think that speaks also to the fact that our societies promote sort of these relationships where members of the family come in and they help. And there are a lot of people out there who have been educated with the support of their siblings or somebody else in the family.
All right.
Totally. And so I wanted to ask you both about like your experiences going to university, like Uncle Muyatwa, like how was your experience at like the Copperbelt University? And then Auntie, how was yours at Yunza?
Mulongoshi.
And like, would you say it's changed? Because I feel like whenever I hear about like schools in Zambia or the universities, there's always, some sort of strikes or like protests and, just people being upset with like the administration and things like that. Would you say things were like a little bit better back then and then they're just getting worse, or?
Well, since I went to Mulungushi University, it's part government and part private. For me, I can say I did not really experience that at my university, mainly due to like the ownership. It's not fully government funded university, so probably that could be the reason why we never had those abrupt closures. So I was able to actually finish my studies within the time that was, that I expected to finish. However, at the Copperbelt University, since it's a government funded university, I think.
What are you going to say about my university? You want to say that it was a bad? Okay, finish. What do you want to say?
No, I was just going to say that I think you'd be the best person to kind of like talk about that issue because you might have experienced that.
You're right, Ndula. We always fight about these universities. Which one is good? Which one is not? So, well, for the Copperbelt University, this is another striking similarity with sort of the experience Bulongo has had. Mm-hmm. There was a bit of a choice for me to go to Copperbelt University, and on one hand, also it was not a choice. But one of the reasons why I applied there was because it seemed to be more consistent than the university in Lusaka, University of Zambia. And so I applied to go to the Copperbelt University with the hope that I would finish within the time that was allocated to the program. And surprisingly, it stuck to the calendar, and we finished right on time. Except there was, the student strikes or demonstrations, those were common, but they did not lead to long closures, or the government at the time perhaps was a bit more tolerant, and so they weren't very long closures. And the only experience that I remember, which I think was unfortunate, was when they had to close the university because of the general elections, the presidential, parliamentary, and local government elections. And I think that was in 2001, towards the end of 2001. So they closed the university, and it so happened that most of the students had registered to vote in that location, but then they closed the university, asked everyone to leave, and so we all left, and we were everywhere in the country except the place where we really wanted to be to vote. And that was one thing I look back and feel that it was systematic disenfranchisement of the right to choose a government.
Totally.
But other than that, yeah, I do not recall. We closed, not that we closed, we had demonstrations very frequently, but they never led to long closures.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like, maybe just to comment on if we think that it's getting worse, I actually think that things are getting worse now for universities. We've had like closures at the CBU. There's been like a long, sort of indefinite closure, and I just feel that partly it could be because government now does not really prioritize education as it's supposed to. To what can you say about that? No comment.
I know, right? About to get a little political. No.
Yeah.
Some years back, I would have easily said something. Now I can't.
Oh man. I mean, I think it's just frustrating because I'm like, if people are, supposed to be going to universities to like learn and, increase their knowledge and skills so that they can be, like employable. But then it's like you deny them that access, and then like then you start acting surprised when like there are no new jobs being created. People can't find work, and it's just, I don't know, it just seems to not make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about jobs, I'm part of a group of students that went to the school that I attended at CBU, and we set up this group in 2016, and we've just sort of revived it now. And there's a lot of talk about jobs, a lot of people who've sort of just been offloaded onto the industry, who are sort of asking questions about how they can get themselves a good job, and one that's also meaningful in the profession that they took, because there are a lot of people who have branched into other fields. But I think I do get the point one of the colleagues was making, that if you train in this particular course, which is not very related to banking, and you end up being a bank clerk, then perhaps that's not the best use of the resource that the university has to train people in that field. And so what can be done for people to get jobs that match with the skills that they have gained? And that's really a big issue, and I think it's one that has to be looked at holistically, not just sort of for the field that I studied, but I think for several fields. What's the job environment? What industries and opportunities exist for people to jump into that? And I think that's a really big issue.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like even with, a lot of my friends that are now just like graduating or maybe graduated last year back home, it's like, they're still in that process of like trying to find work, and, that's meaningful and not just like, some sort of like unskilled job that really doesn't make sense for like what they studied and all that time that they put in to study. So.
Right.
So do you, what would you, like if you could come up with like one solution to say like, okay, this is an approach we could take to make sure that we're creating jobs, like what would that be?
It's a very good question, Ziggy.
Yes. See, so this is very interesting. Should I say I'm trying to write something? Maybe I should not say that. I have already said it.
You have already said it.
So, I mean, because we've talked about this, that I think that in terms of jobs, and particularly when you come to the case of Zambia, I think we've got something that's historical, which is still a very big shadow that we need to deal with. The fact that we've always relied a lot on copper mining. And even if we've talked about agriculture, I don't think that diversification has been very significant. But part of the issue is that a very big part of the population is also in agriculture, and it's doing the kind of agriculture that is it's at a very small scale. And I think that if you've got a very big part of your population stuck or trapped in that, and it's a cyclic situation where they're not getting more skills, they're not using new tools and mechanisms, they're not graduating from the type of equipment that they're using to actually be more efficient, to reach scale. I think that there is the place we need to start to realize that we've got a very big part of the population that's stuck in agriculture, and they're in agriculture doing very small scale type of agriculture that's also rain dependent, and that's the labor that we need to somehow liberate so that they could contribute and do other things. Now, if you liberated that type of labor, you then need to create a lot more ways of engaging with that labor. And so you need to look at other types of services. You need to look at manufacturing. You need to look at other types of, it could even be technological based types of services. But again, you cannot rely on some of these sort of services that require a lot of high skills, because this labor that is trapped in my mind is labor that is not that does not have tertiary education, for example. So there are two things. There's one in terms of recognizing that part of the problem is just with the fact that we've got a very, very big portion of the population that's stuck in this low skilled, small scale type of production. And then B, you've got those that are coming out of universities, and those can get assimilated into the formal labor force. But you also need the blue collar types of jobs for those people to actually get entry into that labor force. Now, the biggest challenge in my view is, A, do we have entry positions? Do we have sufficient entry positions? Or some of these entry positions, are they more available in one part of the country as opposed to another part of the country? So then it might just be an issue of information and getting labor to be a bit more mobile within the country. And I think that on one hand, while we're having some relatively new mines coming up in the northwestern part of the country, we should continue to diversify, and that diversification for me is both in terms of strengthening agriculture, but realizing that that strengthening of agriculture should not continue to be a bigger part of the population. I think we can do a lot with agriculture with a smaller part of the population, and then release or get most of those other people into other types of services. And I think that's where we can get into manufacturing. And there are a lot of things that we've had some experience in the past. I understand why we sort of left some of those industries, but I think there's room to actually rejuvenate some of them or think of others where we could be more competitive. It might be just in the agribusiness value chain. So instead of people getting stuck in actually tilling the land and doing production, they could actually be involved in the other parts of the supply chain, of the value chain, which requires a lot. I mean, our market within the sub-region is also very big. And if we took advantage of that, markets in the Congo, in Angola, South Africa even, and try to sort of use the labor we have to be able to supply in those regions, I think we could create more jobs. But also I think in most countries, the path for job creation has been through public infrastructure, public utilities. So, and we do have actually that crisis of roads or bridges that need to be worked on, that need to be done. Now, to do that, it's most likely that you have to get more loans, which is actually another part of the problem, because we sort of have this huge debt crisis. So how do you get to a situation where you could invest more through public infrastructure and then employ a lot more people, but at the same time not get more loans, which is a political issue. And I think there is a balance that has to be struck between trying to save, to use what we have more effectively, and then if we get additional resources, do that innovatively so that we can actually get to repay some of those costs that would need to be spent upfront, but in the process sort of create jobs. So I think sort of there are a lot of things that can be done here, not just for one type of industry, like the kind of training that I did, but I think for several other things, just to get the country back onto the path of more employment and jobs.
Mm.
Wow. Yeah,
Um,
thank you for sharing that. Super
yeah.
informative. Yeah.
And I think on the part of agriculture, I think agriculture still is a good thing, but I feel that our farmers are not like given a break, sort of, for lack of a better term, a break, because you find that these big stores, for example, ShopRite, what's the other one, Pick and Pay,
Mm-hmm.
they have they import vegetables, like things that we grow locally. For example, green beans and you know, those collard greens and other types of vegetables. Those are some of the vegetables that we locally grow, and they import such things, and our local farmers do not get any, you know, they
Way to
cannot
share that.
um, penetrate, yeah, the like big businesses. So I feel that that is one part of the problem that we have in terms of
Wow.
agriculture. Yeah,
That's
finding
so
market.
disappointing
Mm-hmm.
to hear. Yeah, because you would think that
Right.
they would prioritize, like, local farmers and things like that to be the
Mm-hmm.
suppliers versus,
Right.
bringing in vegetables from like outside the country. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think in some cases they might try to do that. Um, I think part of the issue is also is that supply is sustainable. So,
Mm.
and we see this in the poultry business because we try to do that ourselves. Um, and so you might have a demand, but you need to be able to consistently supply. And if you're a farmer that is very much dependent on the rain season, then you're only in business for 2 to 3 months, say from March to maybe from end of February to maybe end of April. And these retailers, they are running every day they're running every day of the year, and their clients need to have those things on a regular basis. So I think that part of it comes to the consistency in supply, and I'm not saying that that's the problem of the farmer, um, because I remember growing up on a farm that we tried to grow crops when it wasn't the rain season. We had other challenges to access the market, to get our produce to the market. And the best years of farming for me were the years when I was very young. And since from that point on, it just seemed like a downward slope spiral towards the demise of the farming, of sort of us in the farming industry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can sort of like understand that, because like I believe like your family growing up were subsistent types of farmers,
Mm-hmm.
but I am more like concentrating on the commercial type of farmers,
Yes,
because I feel that the commercial type of farmers, they do have it's not seasonal, and they do have like those large greenhouses, and
that's true.
they do try to produce throughout the year.
That's true.
So if these retailers are like importing things like tomatoes, onions, things that our farmers are growing, then there's a problem with, like the trade laws or deals. Mm.
Totally. Wow. Yeah, thank you both for sharing like that insight that you have on like farming and agriculture back home. I feel like it's definitely something that we need to continue to like focus on and invest in, because such a large amount of our people rely on farming as like either
Right.
like yeah as subsistence farmers, or they
Mhm.
rely on that to like commercially or whatever. So
Right. Right. Right.
wow. And
Yeah.
so
I mean. just commenting because we're not like professionals on the in the agriculture
I
field,
mean,
but we're just commenting on like the little knowledge that we have and what we actually observe in the country.
y'all know way more than I do, so you are experts in my book on this. So cool. And so I wanted to kind of move on to maybe like if you could briefly like share like how you both met, and then like also I know you've lived outside of Zambia, so if you could share some of your experiences. I know you lived in Senegal for a little bit, so I'd love to hear about like what that was like, and maybe what you were working on while you were there.
Mhm. Do you want to say briefly how we met?
Oh, the story of how we met, because I saw her first. So I have to speak first on that one. So this one time, my family and I had just moved into this location, which is the location where she used to stay. And so one day, I can't remember the day, but because of what she was wearing, I think that day was a Saturday. And she was wearing nice green skirt, white shirt, and she was walking down the road with this other guy.
It was uniform, by the way.
Yeah, so that was a uniform for church. And so I see these two they were kids. I was a kid as well, but I see these two, this lady and this girl and this boy, and they're walking down the road. We were walking in opposite directions. So I was going towards them. They were coming towards me, and I see them in the uniform, and I'm like, okay, I think they're from my church. And as they get close, I sort of focus more on the girl. She looks so beautiful, so pretty, and sort of two things go on in my mind. And I just think if I marry this girl, I'll be the happiest man in the world. And then the second thing is that I don't really like the guy she's working with. I hope they're not in any kind of relationship. And that's it. I disappear. And they disappear as well. So 3 years later, I think it was actually 3 years later, um, I am in the same location. I'm going to church, this church that's close by to where my family had just moved to. And we were preparing for an activity at church at the end of the month. So I was preparing this activity to do this activity with another girl. So on a Friday before the day we were going to do the activity in church, this girl says she can't do it anymore. She feels like she's not very ready, and she just basically says she's not going ahead with it. And so I'm a bit discouraged, and I'm thinking, why now? We just have like less than 24 hours to do this, and we've been preparing. But then she says, "Oh, I think my cousin can do this better than I can." And I didn't want to hear the story of the cousin, but somehow she said, "I'm going to bring my cousin," and she disappeared. 5 minutes later, she comes back. Guess with who? She comes back with the girl I had seen 3 years ago walking down that road with this guy.
Oh my God.
And yes, I'm like, I feel like this is exactly her. And they get to where I am. She introduces herself. Bulongo introduces herself to me. And at that point, she can better explain the story, because for me that was all that mattered, that she had sort of come that way.
So, so Sitali was like new at our church, and I didn't know him because just right after high school, I joined a missionary organization and would travel to all these like poor, remote places in Zambia, and I had been on a project in southern province for about 6 months. And the time that I came back, I went back to Lusaka. I was just on a short break, so I found that our church has this Adventist youth program that they have like once a year. They have a big day, so they prepare a lot of activities for that day. So I had just come in and I didn't have anything to do on that day. And my cousin, she came to me and said, "Oh, can you please do me a huge favor? I have like a lot of things to do on this day, and I don't think I can do this one activity. Can you please do it? And I was like, oh, okay, sure, no problem. And then she was like, oh, but you have to do it with somebody else, and you have to do it with that guy, pointing at Sitali. So I was like, oh, okay, I have no problem in doing so. So I walked up to Sitali, and I was like, I introduced myself. I said I'm Bulongo, and my cousin asked me to do the activity with you. So he was he just said, "Oh, okay, okay," and then he left. So he did not say much, and um he didn't even introduce himself to me. So I just thought that, wow, this is the rudest guy ever. So that was my first impression of him. Like, I thought he was actually rude to me. So.
I was very nervous when she introduced herself to me. I couldn't believe it, and so I just walked away to get some breaks and come back. And I came back later, and the only thing I remembered that Saturday was the program we did and how she did it. It was so beautifully done. Then she disappeared for a long time, and by the time she came back, we became friends, and it took about 2 years before she accepted my proposal, my request for her to be my girlfriend. She kept on saying no for a long time, and I was getting distraught. Um, yeah, my landlord had a pop. Is it a pop or is it papaya tree?
Papaya,
He had a
that's what.
papaya tree
Whatever.
in the yard. And every time I spoke to Bulongo and Bulongo said no, I would come back home and I would punch this tree. And my landlord would be like, "You're going to kill my tree." But it literally died in a few months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, until much later she came back. She came to see me and she said somebody had gone to see her and
No,
was
actually, you came to
I
see
came
me
to see
at
you.
my mom's place, and
Yes.
so like he had stopped pursuing me for
Yes.
for some time. So when we still were friends, and sometimes he would pop by my mom's place after work. So this one day he was just he came, and he were just like talking, and I was escorting him to his place.
Yes.
He actually had moved somewhere closer to where my mom lives. So so that particular day, um, I was trying to get him to start the conversation again, like if we can be boyfriend and girlfriend. So I just told him that, do you know there's a guy from church?
Did you make that up?
No, I didn't make it up.
Okay.
It was
Wow.
it was true. So I told him that there's a guy at my church, and he was, like busy pursuing me, but I told him that I have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
So then he was like, "Oh, really? You have a
I
boyfriend?"
was exactly. I was like, have we like grown so far apart? I mean, we used to see each other like almost every day if possible. I used to go and see her, and the last time I had asked was on my birthday, I believe, and she said no, and I said why don't? And she said I don't want to be called anyone's girlfriend, so I felt really bad. So I stopped asking. And this day she tells me she's somebody came to ask her out, and she told him she has a boyfriend. So I was thinking. You even have a boyfriend that I don't even know? What kind of friendship is this?
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, he was like, so oh, okay, so you have a boyfriend?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so he was like waiting, and then I just told him that I told that guy that you're my boyfriend. So so I guess we're boyfriend and girlfriend now. So
Indeed.
so I told him that, and he was so happy. I've never seen him that happy
I
before.
ran
Like,
like I ran. I think like I ran like 100 meters from where we went.
Oh my
Came
gosh.
back, gave her a big hug, and that's how we became boyfriend and girlfriend. And we married, I believe, the year
yeah,
after.
yeah, a
Oh,
year after.
that's so
And it's been
awesome.
10 years since.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you two are so cute. You're like you're both like couple goals, or So yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. And so I wanted to ask, so you guys got married, you said like a year after. Like, how was it? Like, once you had to, like, how soon after did you have to go to Senegal and like move? Like, when did that happen? And like, how was that?
So we had to go to Liberia,
Oh,
and I mean, by the time I was asking her to be my girlfriend, and this is one of the reasons, yes, she said she didn't agree initially because I had sort of downloaded everything that was in my mind. So by the time I was asking her to be my girlfriend, it was clear in my mind that I wanted to marry her as well. So when she said yes, it still needed some work for her to get to the point where she accepts to get married. But in my mind, it was already a done deal if it just depended on her. Then came this opportunity to go and work in Liberia. Um, and so I kind of thought, why do I have to wait to make a formal ask? I will just ask now. So I asked, I asked her to be my
Why?
fiance. No, no, we did the engagement.
Right.
Yes, okay, which is when I asked you to be my wife, right? Okay, okay, okay. So
Well,
we did.
anyway. So I think like we had been dating for some time, and he got this job, and it was outside the country, and we were like, just sort of fresh in the relationship, but we had known each other for some time because
Yes,
we're friends and still hanging out. But we're just like puzzled, like what's going to happen now? Do we want this long distance thing?
exactly. Yeah.
And what's going to happen to us? And so we just like talked about how about we just, and like some in our culture, like it wasn't really um, something that we could consider, like I could go and visit him in a different country as my boyfriend. So we just decided that maybe if we should just get married, and it would be okay because we know each other at this point, and we wouldn't. It's just it happened earlier than we would have
Yes,
actually wanted, but it was still
it was
something
right.
that we thought was the right thing to do.
mm.
So yeah, so when he got the job and he had to come back and get his wife bride.
Exactly.
Aw.
So I
And
got
so,
the job, left, stayed for 4 months, then came back, and then we had the wedding.
Yeah.
oh wow. And so, what was it like working in Liberia?
Mm. So yeah, Liberia was. So this was 2008 when I left, but we went together in 2009, and 2009 was, I think, 6 years after the civil war in Liberia.
Mm.
So the country was, I mean, trying to recover from the conflict, but there was still a lot of work to be done. Roads that had to be built, just human relations that were still on the mend. Trauma. You remember the lady who used to help us. We were in the car with her one time, and we needed to drop her somewhere. And we took a road that we thought was the nearest to take her to the point where she was going. But as soon as we got onto that road, and it was a point where we could not just turn back, and we had already gone into that road, I didn't ask, we just started driving in that direction. And she screamed that she didn't want to use that road. And I mean, we didn't understand until eventually she said she had been on that road with her sister when during the Civil War. And she lost her sister. Literally, they were running and there were gunshots, and her sister was shot, and she lost her on that road, and she had not used that route since. And here we were, sort of taking her on that path. We hadn't asked. It was something that did not occur to me to sort of check which route we should take. But why am I saying that? Just that the trauma was still there. One of our close friends that we made from church, we don't even know where he is now. He sort of got some mental issues. It turned out he was a child soldier. But there were also really good memories, places that had remained pristine and beautiful, places that they were rebuilding. And one thing that really impressed me was how fast they seemed to work on projects. So roads, for example, you would pass in one location, there's literally a very dilapidated road. You come back in 3 months, they've done it and done it. Some of the early ones were not done well, but later they were done properly. My work specifically was on water and sanitation. And the thing that surprised me when I got there initially was that it was raining almost every day. And so I sort of wondered, what's the problem? What's the water problem here? And it turns out that the water quality is the issue. People need to, if you're getting water from a well or from a river, very high chances that water is not of the right quality, and so you need it to be purified for you to be able for it to reach the right drinking water quality. And so in some cases it was, yes, the access to water, but in a lot of cases it was the problem of quality, and also in just the type of places where people got that water. Sanitation was even a much, much bigger problem. There's this one community which had 70,000 people, and the last big project was in the 70s or 80s, if I'm not mistaken, which had put in some communal bathrooms where people could go and pay. You have a shower, you also pay, you use the toilet, and this is a community of 70 people. And so a lot of people ended up using the beach as a toilet, and just walking on that beach, seeing droves of people, yes, or sitting on the beach, one next to the other, and it's sort of just having even a conversation, and just the dignity and how that was robbed. How people just seem to be robbed of dignity. For me, it was very, very striking. So yes, sanitation, a huge problem. Water also a significant problem. And the thing with locations like that is that you can tend to see the value you are adding, especially because it's starting from a very difficult situation. And I remember having to go for a meeting in Ghana, and the meeting was just for 1 hour with one of the embassies. And Bulongo said, "You're going to go to Ghana just for 1 hour? You're spending all that money?" And I really felt bad. I really felt bad. I was like, should I cancel this trip? But then I went for that meeting, and 2 years down the line, that the government of that embassy that I had gone to meet put in $10 million into Liberia. So so you could sort of see how you could make a contribution. Yeah. I don't know, for you.
Well, like when I went to Liberia, the first thing was, first of all, I was just happy to be there as a new bride. I was there with my husband, so for me it was just a new place, and everything was just okay until I started hearing, the stories of trauma, PTSD, and anxiety. People like having mental problems like anxiety, depression, and just seeing a lot of people who were like, they had missing limbs, and they were begging outside the stores. That was like a point for me that gave me, that sort of like was depressing, because you'd go to the store and you feel kind of privileged because you can go and walk into the store and get whatever you want to get, like to buy, and you walk outside and people are like very poor, begging, and they do not have like hands or legs because of the war. It was just one of the issues that really touched me. when I was in Liberia, and I think I had like a few nightmares about that, just because of the surroundings and seeing all these things and people with a lot of trauma and issues. So that was one part that I still think about Liberia, and it's like he said, like they have a lot of sanitation problems, and you can see like even during the Ebola crisis,
Right.
yeah, it was really a situation that went out of hand just because you have all these things that are kind of fueling the whole epidemic. And I started my university from there actually, and it was really sad to learn that one of my professors, who was very good English professor, he he actually died during the Ebola crisis, and was one of the sad realities of the disease. Yeah,
Wow. Dang. I'm so sorry about that.
yeah,
That's so
yeah.
Dang.
sad. That's so
Sad.
sad.
Yeah.
We made great friendships on the other
Mhm.
side.
Yeah.
People that we count among our closest friends to this
Mhm.
day. Um, yeah. Uh, the thing that I mean when I think about Liberia is because they say in literature that within the first 10 years after a conflict, those are really then precarious years in terms of the risk of conflict coming back again. With Liberia, you would sort of think that we're sort of gone out of that window.
Mhm.
Um, but then peace and stability is something to keep working on every time. There's no moment of saying, okay, we've arrived and we've solved it and it's going to be there with us forever. I mean, that's the same case even for countries like Zambia that may not have seen a civil conflict. That peace and stability are things not to take
For
for
granted.
granted. Yeah.
Mhm.
Totally. Oh, wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences in Liberia. If someone wants to kind of learn more about the Civil War, do you recommend any particular like books, or should they just like kind of Google, what happened if they want to learn more?
There are a lot of books. I mean, one could also look at it. It depends on which angle somebody wants to take. If it's sort of also knowing about some of the people who emerged as leaders, I would recommend a book by Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. I think the title is "This Child Will Be Great." That's a good one. But Ellen Johnson Sirleaf shared the Nobel Peace Prize with another lady, Lima Bowie. And it was actually women that played a very critical role in sort of getting the peace accord to be set in place. They just literally sort of told the men, I mean, told the people who were in this meeting that you've got to discuss it until you have a resolution, and you're not coming out until you have a resolution. And that group of people worked on it until they had something promising in Ghana, and then came back to Liberia with it. So Ellen Johnson Sirleaf shares this Nobel Peace Prize with Lima Bowie, and she too has written a book. I hope I'm not mistaken. It could be that This Child Will Be Great was written by Lima Bowie or Ellen. I think it's Ellen. Anyway, if somebody sort of Googles those two people, you would find something really interesting to read. And I mean, there are videos and other stuff that are very grotesque in terms of what they show, like the death of Samuel Doe, who was the one of the presidents. I mean, that just sort of gives you very emotional stuff.
Right.
There are videos that are out there, but I think if you sort of want to also read the story, I mean, read from many sources. That's one thing I would say. It's also a very complicated history. We were there for 2 years. It's nothing. It's a drop in the ocean in terms of understanding the entire history and context. It's so rooted, so deeply connected to the US in a way, but also so deeply connected to own issues in the country. So it's really complicated.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'll make sure to like include that in the notes so that if people want to, learn more, they can do that. So yeah, thank you both so much for sharing that again. And I think
No
just
problem.
yeah. So just one last question I want to ask both of you is like what kind of gives you hope about it can be like about Africa or about Zambia specifically. Like is there one thing that you like have observed like recently that you're like, oh wow, like that's so cool, like I want to see more of that, or like what's kind of inspiring you right now?
For me, I think that, well, that's a good question, Dula. I feel that with the emergence of social media, like we have a lot of millennials and people born in the 2000s. I think that they are very innovative, and that kind of gives me the hope, and people are willing, they're not like credulous. They want to research on things. They want to question the government. I'm not trying to be political, Sitali will be like, don't comment on this. But they're willing to like question what is happening in their government, like. So I think that with this growing number of youth taking action, that really gives me hope, and just not in terms of just political nature, but also in terms of like businesses and just money or financial stuff. They are really innovative. So that kind of gives me hope. Like people are trying to get out of that generational poverty and just be creative in entrepreneurship and other ventures.
I agree, and I think that so there are two sides for me how I look at this. There's I think that the young people are very attuned in terms of business, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of using technology. That's really great, and I think that there for me is where the hope lies. People are innovative. They're finding ways to get by even in very, very difficult circumstances. The part where I feel like if this generation, our generation, was the one to have to deal, I cannot say that. Um, I think there are a lot of places where there's complacency, or there are places where we feel it is not our time or it is not our job, and maybe it is for some other people to do it. And that's very much perhaps in the area of political leadership, and that's not in terms of everyone. But I think in terms of business, yes, everybody feels like we've got to do something, and obviously that's because that's where bread and butter comes from. Um, but I think that in terms of business, really innovative and entrepreneurial, and I think that will help to keep us afloat.
Hmm. Yeah, I think like just a lot of people thinking outside the box, like sort of like deviating from thinking like life is all linear. You just do this and this step will lead to this, sort of like a domino effect. But life is like, people realize like life does not work like that. You have to do a lot of things, build up on a lot of skills. You cannot just have like one skill these days. So you just have to like continuously try to improve yourself, look at what is there, what you can learn, and learn whatever you have to learn. So I feel that the new generation, the younger generations, are really taking that up and being serious about life, and also while having fun. So that is really giving us hope for the next generations.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I totally agree. I feel like I see so much like creativity and so many young people just, finding a way to like survive, despite like their circumstances. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely think that there's a lot more that we can do to, obviously support young people so that they're not having to, have multiple hustles or, especially like informal, things. I think, yeah, there's more work to be done, but yeah, that gives me hope too, just seeing people just kind of do their thing. Yeah, and so I think that concludes like all the questions that I had for you both. Thank you again for both being guests on Dear Diaspora.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
So I don't know about y'all, but I learned so much in that hour. And again, thank you to my aunt and uncle for being on the show. I really respect and admire them. And if you felt the same way, or if something that you heard during the conversation inspired you, I'd love to hear about it. Shoot me an email at deardiasporashow@gmail.com. I've also thought about possibly starting some sort of maybe like Facebook group or WhatsApp group. If you think that you would like a space to continue to have some of these conversations, feel free to shoot me an email and let me know. But I'm not like the biggest fan of like Facebook, for instance, so I don't know if that would work. But obviously, this is not all about me. So if you think that it would be great to have that space, please let me know. Thanks for listening to Dear Diaspora. If you like what you hear, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. You can find us on Instagram at Dear Diaspora or visit our website at deardiasporashow.com. Thank you, and talk to you next week.